a lot of the cuneiform language is already deciphered.
Sure.
Can you speak to the deciphering process? How hard is it? Maybe take us to this place of for you yourself first learning the language, figuring out the puzzle of it. How does it feel? How does it look like to a brain that doesn't deeply understand it? And how do you then piece stuff together? Maybe you can go to the early days, sort of the Rosetta Stone of cuneiform also.
That's important. Well, the first thing is that how the cuneiform writing system works, because the crucial point, and once you see it, makes a lot of things clear, is that they wrote in syllables. So if you take the English alphabet, which of course they didn't, you have the letter B, G, D, P, H, and so forth. They couldn't write a consonant. They couldn't do that. So what they did is they had a vowel before a consonant or one after. So you have ab and ba. But as they had 4 vowels, you had to have ab and ba, ib and b, ub and bu, eb and be.
Mm-hmm.
So you had the range of things clustered around what we call a consonant. So they had all those for all the letters, which gave them a basic system. There was much more to it than that, and it was more complicated than that, but we don't have to really go into it. But basically, if you are a Babylonian and we want to write the word museum, which of course is one of the most important words in the English language and other languages too. So what you would do is you would write the syllable mu, and then the sign z, and then the sign So you split the word up into its component syllables. When you read it in your mind, you squash them together into museum. That's the basic system. They had other signs which gave you a clue as to the meaning and the other bits around the edge, but it's basically syllabic writing.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go to university to study cuneiform, what you have to learn is all the signs and all their values, because unfortunately they didn't just have one for each, they had multiple ones. And the reason is not that they were mad or they wanted to make life hell, but because the syllables derive from the writing of Sumerian words. So the Sumerian vocabulary had a lot of words that were probably differentiated by tone. So you might have ba, and then a rising ah, and then a lowering, and these signs all retain the ba value even though there were no tones. So it means if you look at a sign list, there's a lot of signs. You have bar number 1, which is the common, then there's bar number 2, bar number 3, and you have to learn them all. And when you read, you have to learn how to do it. So when in the modern world, if you go to university to do Assyriology, which I hope you and all of your disciples will do as soon as possible, you actually have to cope with 2 languages, the Sumerian and the Babylonian. Now, the first thing is this, that the Babylonian language is a Semitic tongue, which, although it's extinct, is connected to or related to Hebrew, Aramaic, Arabic, Ethiopic, Syriac, all that family of Semitic languages which are still alive. It's an early example of one of those. So that when the decipherment came along, it was the Semitic dictionary that they fell back on to identify words, nouns, and roots. The other language, which is Sumerian, the one when you stick bits in the beginning and stick bits at the end, is not only not Semitic, it's not related to any other known language.
Oh, no.
Yeah, this is a bewitching thing. It's a bewitching thing to me. And this is how to understand it, because the languages that we study in the world today, linguists study, they more or less all fall into a language group. So you have Indo-European with Spanish, Italian, Latin, Hittite, and so forth. And so that's what French, that's one group, and you have Germanic and you have Slavonic, and most languages, even the far-flung ones, fall into what can be seen to be maybe big and airy groups, their family, like that. There's not one for Sumerian. So this means that the truth that languages do not exist in a vacuum, but they're part of a big family, must always have been true. So that when writing arrives about 300 BC, to write properly, it means that Sumerian was recorded just in time. But the big languages maybe in China, in Russia, in somewhere else in Asia, that were related to Sumerian
Are gone?
are all gone. They're gone forever and ever and ever, unless something amazing happens. So we've got the one representative of this bizarre family. So that
Amazing.
it's a very stimulating thing to imagine. I personally believe that Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens, for sure, had language. For sure, they talked to one another. It's impossible that they didn't. The point came when they did. They did. And the Neanderthals, 800,000 years of live in Europe. They had to deal with the Ice Age. They all lived together. They bring up their children. You think they couldn't speak anything? They have the same apparatus. And if you have a human brain, then it responds to stimulus. And the more stimulus there is for communication, I mean, the idea that you and I are out hunting rhino and you say, Lex, well, shut up, I'm constant, Lex. And then I suddenly think, oh, I get it. You are Lex, right? You only have to do that once, then you know who I am. So I know that I'm me and that you are you. So people who say that they couldn't distinguish ego and all that, it's absolutely stupid. If you cut your hand with a knife, you sure as hell experience it. You sure as hell do. It hurts. It hurts a lot. You might even bleed to death. But it's not somebody else's hand. And it's your hand and it's your existence and your life that's threatened. You think people weren't conscious that they were an entity? I don't believe it.
And they probably had a way to express that with sounds.
Well, eventually, yes. Names. I mean,
Names.
Names are things. And then you have the idea that a label fixes to something. Then the light bulb has gone on, and next minute you have rhino and you have skin and you have babies and you have, because I think you have an idea, and the idea then drives the brain, and the brain has another idea. It works like fertility.
So what do you think is the motivation, the primary driver of developing written language? Is it goes hand in hand with civilization?
I think that the milieu in which it appears is when there's a lot of people living in an urban environment.
Yeah.
And with rival institutions, or with a king, or with a government, or all those sorts of things. And that's why I think in Göbekli Tepe must have been the same thing. I read somewhere that they're all nomads and they only came to Göbekli Tepe, 3 months a year. I mean, that cannot be true, that they were nomads, and it cannot be true. To get the stone, and someone has to draw on the ground the plan of the building. They have to work out how thick it is going to be, how high it's going to be. And I mean, you can't just, like that, like gorillas.
All right, so deciphering, the process of deciphering.
So when I started, there were grammars and sign lists and dictionaries. Everything was marvelous. It was all basically deciphered. All you had to do was get on with learning it. But at the beginning, when the first tablets and bricks in cuneiform and stone inscriptions came to light, no one could read them. But they knew they were writing, but they didn't know how to read them. And what happened was, like you said before, with the Rosetta Stone, it was something directly comparable, because there was an inscription of one of the Persian kings halfway up a mountain in a place called Bisutun, where this King Darius had written an account of his successful career in Elamite and in Babylonian and in Old Persian, trilingual version. And Old Persian, although it is obviously an archaic form of the language, Persian is still alive. It was still alive in the 19th century. So since the Old Persian was written in a very simple style of cuneiform, they deciphered it. They twigged it was Old Persian. They read it in Persian, and they read the names Dariush in Old Persian. And then suddenly somebody realized that the other two columns, about the same length,
Brilliant.
what do you know? And the thing is, it said, I am Darius, the great king of the world, king of the universe, son of diddly 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 diddly, grandson of diddly diddly diddly. So there's a whole paragraph with repeated things in the Persian, which they could understand. So what do you know? There are reiterated passages in the other two languages. So that was the key, that kind of the chisel that opened up cuneiform writing proper. And the thing was, they soon twigged that the language of the Babylonian was a Semitic tongue. And this was so important. I think the first word they discovered was the word for river, which is Naru in Akkadian and Nachar in Arabic and Aramaic. And when they realized that the word that corresponded to the Persian had this form, this was a gift of gold, because everybody immediately sees their Arabic and Hebrew dictionaries and started leafing through looking for words that would fit in the context. And they decipher this inscription in that sort of way. And of course, all the other inscriptions came in order, and there were lots and lots of difficulties which had to be resolved. But that's the basic thing. And without that trilingual, I don't know what would have happened. I mean, I suppose it's conceivable that in the very modern world, something might have happened. But as it was done by sheer brain power, by very, very clever persons, just doing it. And they cracked it. The Elamite language is much more difficult, but they got a lot of it too. So it was a very romantic thing, because the inscription was carved on a mountain face far above the plain. And Henry Rawlinson, who was a upstanding young British officer who claimed to decipher cuneiform quite unjustifiably, climbed up there with some miserable kid and made squeezes of the whole thing overlooking the plain, thousands of feet up in the air, and brought those back, and they were used in the decipherment. So it's very romantic.
Wait a minute. More controversial statement from Irving today. Henry Rawlinson doesn't deserve the credit for that?
No, I don't think he does. He's called the father of Assyriology, but I think he's the stepfather of Assyriology, because when he first got these inscriptions, he wrote a long book about it, which was almost entirely wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a clergyman in Northern Ireland called Edward Hincks, who lived in a place called Killaloe and had 5 daughters and ran this church, who was possibly a card-carrying genius, if not jolly, jolly close. And what happened with him was this. There was an ongoing competition, an ongoing challenge to decipher hieroglyphic writing, which Champollion usually gets the credit for. And Hincks was very interested in trying to decipher hieroglyphic ahead of the French. And he ran into a sort of dead end at one stage, and he thought he'd have a look at cuneiform to see if it was helpful. And at the same time, he cracked it. He worked out how it worked. He realized that one sign can have more than one value of sound and of meaning, because they are multivalent, the signs. I tried to shelter you from the horrible news, but it's actually, it's not a walk in the park. It takes about 5 years to you probably do it in about 4, probably.
That is a compliment. I think you just complimented me. Thank you. Thank you very much. So you're saying one sign that looks exactly the same might have different sounds given the context?
Yeah, and you have to choose the right sound, and also different meaning as well. Because, for example, if you have a sign for hot, word hot, right, you can't really have a picture sign for hot. It doesn't make sense. But what they did is they did a drawing of a kind of complex thing with a brazier inside another sign, which meant hot. So that sign existed, but it also meant other things as well, and you had to choose the right one for the context. It's all a contextual matter. I mean, it really is quite a matter for despair when you start cuneiform, because on top of everything else, they didn't leave gaps between the words.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
so they're all connected.
That's really mean. Yeah. So when you read, what you have to do, you start with the first sign, and you think of the sign list, and you go through the values in your mind, and there's next sign. And if one is bar and the next one is ab, among other readings, bar ab sounds like a syllable structure for a word, and you go on like that. Mm-hmm. So there are 2 things about it. One is that if you want to, you can master it. The other thing is that the number of variables was restricted. They controlled it, so it wasn't insane. Mm-hmm. So in other words, if you learn the corpus and you learn how the signs are composed and you learn their different values, then you've got it down, mm-hmm. and off you go. And it's very beautiful, I think. It's marvelous.
Can you, in all seriousness, take me back to the time when you were learning it? What's the process of learning it?
Well, I had a very abnormal upbringing, because when I went to university, for about 3 years beforehand, I'd wanted to be an Egyptologist. So I'd read the grammar by Gardiner and was looking forward very much to studying ancient Egyptian. And what happened was that I went up to the University of Birmingham, where I went to university, and there was a man called Rundle Clark, who was an Egyptologist, And Rundle Clark came in on the Monday and gave us one lesson about Egyptian sculpture or something like that. And the next day he died. Bang. So the professor called me into his room and said, look, it's going to take me a while to get an Egyptologist. They don't grow on trees. But there's another person in this department who teaches another ancient language called Lambert, and he teaches cuneiform. So what I suggest is you go and do a bit of cuneiform with Professor Lambert, and then when I get an Egyptologist, you can convert back. So I go and knock on the door. Yes? So I went in and said, I want to learn cuneiform. And Professor Lambert, who was rather a Sherlock Holmes kind of figure, aesthetic, bony, sarcastic, cruel, absolutely terrifying. And I said, I wanted to learn cuneiform, and he wasn't at all pleased, because this was a time in Britain when professors resented having students to teach because it butted into their research time. It was that sort of arrangement.
Yes.
Anyway, I started it off, and after about, I don't know, maybe one or maybe two lessons, I knew this was going to be my life's work. So that's what happened to me. It was an amazing thing. So he gave me a list of signs to learn, basic signs. So I did. And the next couple of days, and then we came in and we started reading.